Hi, this is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Wanted to make a video to go over something that came from the community. This is from Pi Lanningham. Pi is one of the founders of Sunday Labs. You may know him from Sunday Swap and all the work he does in Acropolis and at Pragma and other places. But he wrote up something that's so cool that what I want to do is actually read it out verbatim and comment a little bit on it because it is a phenomenal postmortem, and I think it actually accomplishes more than just being a postmortem. It accomplishes terminology in that we can use again and again in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There's a link to this. So the title is Poison Piggy After Action Report. He just published it. We're going to read it out loud. If you don't like that, well, go find something else to do. It's my channel. I get to do whatever I want. All right. Introduction. On November 21st, 2025, Cardano suffered a severe degradation of service that lasted roughly 14 hours. This blog post serves as my independent record of what happened, my assessment of how serious it was, and my assessment of how the network chain and community responded to it. My goals with this post are to present the cold facts and my expert opinion in sufficiently approachable language that anyone should be able to form their own opinion on. I hope I am successful in confronting the seriousness of the incident head on, making no excuses simply because I've chosen to build on Cardano. On the other hand, I hope to effectively explain the nuance around this event, avoid catastrophizing, and highlight what went wrong. You, as the reader, will have to judge whether I did this effectively. There will likely be endless, exhausting, and pointless debate about what terms to use to describe this. I think this kind of discussion is ultimately masturbatory. Love this guy. And stems on one side from people eager to see Cardano's no downtime claim dethroned, and on the other side to cling to that unbroken Duolingo streak. What matters is impact. I will describe the real-world impact and the taxonomy I use consistently to classify these events. If after that you decide for yourself that Cardano, quote, went down, I won't begrudge you your opinion. I'm not precious about that label, and I think reasonable people can disagree. What I would ask is if you want to operate in the public space in good faith, is that you form this opinion on your own, not from some Twitter talking head who has predecided what this event means. Or, if you are one of those Twitter talking heads, at least do your audience the courtesy of defining what your thresholds what are your thresholds for whatever label you use are, and apply them consistently to the other similar events I'll describe below. Hopefully this kind of reasonable effect is not too much to ask from Twitter, but it probably is. All right. TLDR. First, a serialization bug caused a unidirectional, quote, soft fork of Cardano. First on preview, testnet, then on mainnet. A fix was released shortly after the discovery on testnet before the issue occurred on mainnet. This fork seriously degraded quality of the chain, but not as severely as you might think. Transactions submitted via robust infrastructure were delayed by up to 400 seconds. So this is very important. People in the Twitter sphere, they're running around saying Cardano stopped, Cardano was dead, you couldn't do anything with Cardano that day. We were able still to relay transactions, but it could take up to 400 seconds. So obviously not very timely. Time between blocks on the now dominant chain grew to a maximum of 16 minutes. That's very problematic too. Some infrastructure may have created longer delays due to unrelated fragility. Roughly 3.3%, 479 out of 14,383 of transactions didn't make it into the fork that is now dominant. Some systems, particularly bridges or exchanges, were exposed to replay/double spend risk. Analysis of the transactions on the discarded fork is still underway to determine if any of that risk materialized as actual damages. And when I say it's going to take a few weeks to clean it up, that's basically what I was saying, is that you have certain actors, bridges, exchanges, and DeFi applications that were particularly vulnerable to a long chain reorganization, and it's going to take some time. This constitutes a serious degradation of service for users, but within expected bounds for a high nines availability of service. The three founding entities plus Intersect and countless community projects, including Sunday Labs, collaborated to identify and fix the issue, and in making a recommendation to the SPO community on which fork to choose via which versions to run. So that's very important too. So a lot of people tell you that we had to manually reset the network and rebuild everything. We didn't. We said, hey, SPOs, an independent group, you should go with this fork. You have to make a decision. And that was a decentralized process. The SPO community organically endorsed that recommendation, upgrading their nodes, leading to a full organic recovery in roughly 14 hours. So no centralized authority had to restart the chain or intervene. These are the facts. All right, so what happened? Here is, as best as I've been able to put together, a complete timeline of the relevant events on the chain. All times are in my time zone, EST. So I was in London at the time when he was in the Eastern Standard Time, so he's a little bit behind me. On November 20th, 2025, at approximately 15:39, someone submitted a transaction to the preview testnet, which was accepted by some nodes and rejected by others. This was likely accidental, though we don't know for sure who or for what reason this transaction was submitted. So this is really important because this is the threshold of responsible disclosure. If you break the testnet, the entire purpose of the testnet is to be the testnet. It's meant to be broken. It's meant to be tested. It's meant to be stress tests. So if somebody breaks that, that's white hat. That's what people are supposed to do. They're supposed to find clever things. And when they do, they get bug bounties and accolades. And everybody says, oh man, that's a really bad one. We got to fix that. So whether that person's known or not is not particularly material. That's a good actor. That's the white zone. The whole reason the testnet exists is to be a safe space to have a discussion about whether the network is reliable or not. Okay. So then at approximately 18:19, so it's about 3 hours later, I was tagged by Homer J in the SBO testnet's channel. So Homer J is the attacker on the mainnet. We'll get to that in a little bit. Where the issue was being triaged. So you'll notice something, that the testnet was broken. We already knew that something had happened and there was a fork on the testnet. And there was already triaging that was happening because one of the blocks around that time contained Sunday swap transactions. Why Homer tagged pies. Homer is a scooper on Sunday swap. So he had a lot of sophisticated technical knowledge and he was watching all these things real time. This would ultimately be a red herring, but it made me aware of the issue. I checked Sunday swap infrastructure and shared some of the relevant information, such as what versions we were running and which fork we were on. As a policy, we avoid upgrading our infrastructure until we were forced to via a hard fork or a security vulnerability. So I believe Sunday was actually running the old software, which is why there was a fork. People in the old software couldn't talk to the people in the new software. Early diagnostics indicated Cardano DB Sync was crashing due to a serialization error of some kind. We thought perhaps this was the root cause rather than a network partition or a chain fork issue, since it would impact what we see on chain explorers nearly universally. Since, as far as I know, all blockchain explorers are built off querying Cardano DB Sync, this meant we were flying blind as the tools we usually use as our eyes to inspect the state of the chain were either stuck or following a very low density fork of the chain. So that's a resilience issue. Remember in the video I did earlier today, I talked about detection. So this is where we're not really sure what's going on, but we have suspicion because something's not right. After comparing the tips from multiple chains, it became clear that there was indeed a fork in the chain, and it was correlated to node versions. Sunday Labs was running an older version, which followed what would ultimately be considered the healthy fork. And so I coordinated with Ashish from Cardano Scan to open our relays to his infrastructure to read from my fork, which restored our eyes. I began directly messaging with Sam Leathers, chair of the Cardano Product Committee. He had been able to quickly code up a diagnostic tool that found the divergence between the chains. Side note, a big win for the Amaru team here, as the libraries we produced served as a foundation for this tool. So that's an example of where node diversity helps out. Using this tool, we were able to furnish the raw bytes of the transaction, and also invited me to join the Google call meet between core IOG and CF engineers. At around the same time, Andrew Westberg and I identified the faulty hash in the transaction. A delegation certificate to a pool identifier that was twice as big as it should be. Instead of delegating to the pool easy1, it delegated to easy1, easy1. Note the actual delegation certificate references the pool by hash, but I used the ticker here to illustrate the point. The Ledger team was able to quickly track down the bug and when it was introduced and produce a fix. Okay, so everything up to 1 through 8 is stuff that happened in the need to know circles, meaning people that are highly sophisticated, people that know what's going on, people who follow the testnet, people who build on Cardano, core developers of Cardano, the core entities of Cardano like the Cardano Foundation and Intersect and Pragma and Input Output. All this stuff is happening. And none of you would give a flying fuck or damn at all about this if this is all there was to the story, because we would just fix the test net, we would patch mainnet, we just move on. It's happened before. Then something very different happened. A fix was introduced, and this gentleman right here was made aware of that fix, Homer J. And 9, this is where it got problematic. So I was made aware, by the way, early in the process. I was at Milos. It was a nice Greek restaurant in London. We were having an offsite with some workshops. I was talking to Agalos and all these other people, and Jerry Maroney leans in kind of like, when Bush was informed of 9/11, he said, "Mr. President, we have an issue." And I said, "What is it?" "Well, the testnet is just forked." And I said, "Oh, God, do we know how to fix it?" And they said, "Yeah, we already have a patch in the works, and we're working on it." So I knew that we had a race condition during this period of time to get out that patch as quickly as possible. Now, you don't go to Twitter and broadcast that, because you're just broadcasting that the mainnet is vulnerable. You go through the normal disclosure regimes, responsible disclosure, and you talk to all the SBOs and other people and say, look, we have an issue. You either downgrade or upgrade, but we need to get to a node version that's not going to cause a fork. But at the moment, nothing was vulnerable. Okay? This is where a problem occurred. This is when the iceberg hit. 9. On November 21st, 2025, at approximately 3:02, so about my time, I think 8 o'clock or so forth, 8:30, a similar transaction was submitted to mainnet. This one delegated to Rats. Rats is Charles Hoskinson's personal stake pool. So what Homer J did, by his own admission, is he was following all of this and in direct communication with all the people, and he knew that everybody was trying to issue a patch, and he had full understanding of what it did to the testnet, knowing full well that the same conditions were true on the mainnet. So any reasonable person who has 6-7 years of experience in the Cardano ecosystem, being an SPO, would know full well that this attack would cause a fork inside the system. And also knew that a fix had already been propagated, and their duty as SPOs is to get this fixed before someone leverages the attack. Instead, what he did is he backward engineered it, figured out how to make it work on the mainnet, maybe with AI, maybe not AI, and then had to make a decision to deploy that attack onto mainnet. And instead of choosing his own pool, because he's an SPO, for some reason decided to pick the pool of a person that he doesn't like very much, as evidenced by the fact that he was in the fake Fred Discord. This is my own exposition, not Pi's, but I just want to point it out to provide some meta commentary on this for all of you who live in the he's innocent, didn't know what he was doing. All of this, you'll notice 1 through 8, we were treating like a high severity incident, and we're in triage and fix mode. So the war room had already started when we realized that there was a mainnet vulnerability, and we were all working together as one team to try to get this resolved as quickly as possible, which is why some people didn't go to bed. They were working from the prior night before all the way through to the end of the incident. All right. Number 10, I woke up around this time by pure coincidence. I was suffering from a fairly bad cold and was very restless that night, and saw the initial messages reporting that mainnet was suffering from a similar issue. And this is where Pi had the same experience as me. He's like, oh, fuck. I decided there wasn't much I could contribute, as Sunday Labs infrastructure was already on the old version without the bug, but the following day would need people to pick up the mantle with renewed energy. So I made the decision to try to get more sleep while others worked on the remediation. Overnight, IOG, the CF, Emergo, Intersect, many exchanges, and many SPOs et al. Upgraded nodes to the patch version. This was the call fest. Everybody got together in the war room. We were calling people like fucking crazy. Said, guys, you gotta upgrade, we gotta get this done. Collectively, the official recommendation was to choose the fork that was more restrictive. In theory, choosing the more relaxed chain would have resolved the fork faster, since it had the majority of the stake, but it would also created two main challenges. A fix was already released while the impact was only the testnet, and trying to change direction would have muddled the comms, creating confusion about what the actual recommendation should be. But more importantly, B, it was judged that off-chain tooling wallets exchanges would likely have been disrupted for much longer. So while the chain itself might have recovered quickly, the ecosystem would have been impacted much longer. Every single Daedalus user would have to manually reset their wallets. All of the off-chain infrastructure would not work. Your explorers wouldn't show anything for days to weeks. And it would be very difficult for anything to work on Cardano. So effectively, it would have shut Cardano's off-chain ecosystem off for a week. And everybody would have experienced a massive disruption. So that's an understatement of understatements. That's why we went with the old fork. 13, the other chain was nicknamed the Pig chain because it was likely the fat pool delegation, and officially recommended chain was nicknamed the Chicken chain. So you have a race between the pig and the chicken. And believe me, this pig is not a good pig. This is not Nike. This is the worst pig at all. Okay, the chicken, on the other hand, that's a good chicken. We're trying to get back to chicken. At around 4 a.m., existing infrastructure monitoring tools were successfully updated to begin collecting metrics on the pig chain so we could monitor the progress and the likely outcome. So then we were sitting in the war room, and we had a monitor for the pig chain and a monitor for the chicken chain. We saw them racing against each other. In the background, several people began trying to identify who the culprit was, mostly to determine if we should expect further attempts to disrupt the chain's recovery. From 4 a.m. to 10 a.m., the chain was divergent, meaning the faulty transaction on the pig chain would become fully immutable before the chicken chain overtook it. If this happened, all nodes who were following the pig chain would need to manual intervention to recover the longer chain. They would need to be stopped, their databases truncated, and replayed up to the longest fork. So basically, we have this parameter called K in Cardano, and after 12 hours, give or take, things go from mutable to immutable because we assume there will not be a long chain reorg greater than that. So to purge that, you actually have to manually purge it using a script from your system. It's not necessarily unrecoverable. We actually wrote that script in the war room and got it done and pushed it through. By 11 a.m., a beam of sunshine broke through the clouds. The estimated time for the poison transaction to reach immutability was now longer than the time it would take for the other fork to catch up. At this point, we knew the chain would very likely fully recover within 18 hours. So that was about 7 p.m. my time, I believe. I'd have to check, but it was late. Maybe it was 5 hours, whatever the East Coast London was. So that could have been 4. But we were all exhausted because a lot of people had been up late at night, and we were watching real time these things. And Pi actually has some graphs. At this point, we largely just monitored the chain, ensuring that we had full data dumps for analysis for after action reports such as this one. The time of recovery inched down as more and more SPOs made the upgrade, and at roughly 17:16, the chicken chain overtook the pig chain. Since this chain was still valid according to those following the pig chain, they switched to the chicken chain on their own, and the chain fully recovered. It's over. It was hard. It's over. All right. So root cause. In case you missed it, here's an explicit restating of the root cause of the bug. When parsing hashes, such as pool identifiers, transaction hashes, addresses, each type of hash has an expected length, 28 bytes, 32 bytes, etc., etc. In theory, providing a hash that is too short or too long should be considered incorrect. Older versions of the node correctly rejected hashes that were too long. A commit made about a year ago, November 24th, 2024, introduced an obscure code path that would accept hashes that were too long and just truncate to the correct length, discarding the bytes that aren't needed. So that was kind of the root cause of all of it. Very small, obscure bug. And then it became activated, and then the attacker took advantage of it. Okay, analysis as background reading. I suggest reading my previous description of Ouroboros Praus. Here's some interesting pieces of data and charts I came across about the event. So here's the chain. So this is what we were watching. The above chart shows the chain height of the chicken chain in green, Over time, the height of the pig chain, red, and the gap between them in purple. So, oh no, okay, this is the pig chain, but see how the chicken chain's catching up and the gap between them is declining? This was the best gap of my career. I felt very good about that. This is a chart we were constantly refreshing to track the rate of recovery. Here's what it looked like when I woke up right around when the situation started to turn around. Significance. This shows the very clear and predictable path to recovery predicted by / selected for by the design of Ouroboros. We were able to predict a few hours in advance exactly when the chain would recover. There's no other cryptocurrency, by the way, that can do this, but Ouroboros can. It's a unique feature of the Ouroboros protocol. Convergence. The table above shows tracking that was going on during the event, showing the rate of blocks per hour on each fork, the time until the poison transaction became immutable, and in between them, the time until recovery. Here's the same data represented as a chart. Significance. This shows how fluid the stake on Carno is in reacting to and upgrading infrastructure. The fact that the pace of recovery accelerated is a direct measure of this. So you can actually literally see it inside the data, which is really incredible. The time between blocks. One thing that helped the recovery is that the stake started to shift. Time between blocks in the pig fork grew. The time between blocks in the chicken fork shrank. So 12 hours is real life time, but time works differently in a distributed system. It's called the Lamport clock. And so if your consensus algorithm on one side is declining in participation, it expands time. And if on the other side you get higher participation, it contracts time. So one clock starts running faster and the other clock actually starts slowing down, which worked to our advantage here. Chain switch. Here's the moment that several of the monitored IOG nodes gave up on the pig chain and switched to the longer chicken chain, the right chain. Boom, right there. That's a beautiful chart, isn't it? That is just beautiful. That's sexy. Oh, man, you just got to rub oil on your nipples right there from that chart. And here's the video of the same moment as seen by Pool Tool. Significance. This is the concrete evidence when the Nakamoto consensus worked as intended and converged the network to a single canonical history. So two chains became one chain. You can see each relay level off in block height as the propagation of the pig chain grew worse until they recovered to the chicken chain jumping in height. Boop, right there. Canary transactions. The Cardano Foundation runs a service that periodically submits canary transactions to mainnet. These are simple value transfer transactions with various validity ranges to measure the real-world inclusion delays for transactions in the network. That is, for the typical user, how long the transactions are taking to settle on chain. Here's a graph of inclusion times over the interval. You can see that this spiked up to individual cases of 450 seconds to 300 seconds. So normally everything is super fast, and then suddenly, oh my God, what the fuck just happened? Everything is taking like 8 minutes, 9 minutes to get into the chain. We don't understand. When averaged over a span of an hour before slowly converging down to close to 20. So, oh no, everything's bad. Well, actually, we're starting to get back. Significance. This measures objectively what the typical user's experience during the event likely was. Around 5 minutes of delay for their transaction to make it on chain. Some users may have had different experience, but it was likely caused by other third-party infrastructure like wallet and dApp. Usually doubled or tripled the amplification, which is what we experience on the Lace side. Chain quality, another interesting metric to look at the chain quality, which is a measure of what percentage of expected blocks are being produced. This usually fluctuates above and below 100% block times that are randomized schedule. So everything's looking okay, and oh my God, what the fuck just happened? The quality went to nothing, and it slowly gets back up as chicken chain is building, and notice our chain quality is where it needs to be. Mempool, by pure coincidence, the Laos team, because remember they're working 24/7, was running experiments to measure how often a transaction reached a node's mempool before being seen in a block. This gave us lots of interesting insight into how the mempools behave during this event. Note that the important region here is the green one, as the team was still spinning up nodes in other regions. As worth noting, the large green dip is because of the need to upgrade to the new fork and revalidate the database rather than actual disruption of data. This gives some signal that up until the team chose to upgrade the node, most transactions were reaching this node's mempool before being seen in blocks, which is considered healthy behavior, and that transactions were reaching both chains, which ensured most user traffic actually survived the fork. This is another unique property. Typically, when you have a network partition, the network is pairwise disjoint, but we actually had a situation where most nodes were actually seeing things, which actually prevented double spends from happening, which is really cool. Chain statistics. I don't have any good charts for these statistics, and the analysis is still underway. However, we were able to extract some early insights from a data dump of relevant chain. A total of 846 blocks were produced on the Pig chain. So those are all, technically speaking, orphan blocks. The Pig chain included a total of 8,647 transactions. The Chicken chain included a total of 13,904 transactions. The longest gap between blocks in the Chicken chain was 964 seconds, roughly 16 minutes. They had 8,168 transactions in common, and only 479 transactions were included in the Pig chain and not the Chicken chain. That's pretty impressive when you have a network partition situation. This means only 3.33% of user transactions did not make it on the winning chain. IOG attempted to resubmit these, and they were all invalid. 23.16% of all transactions were only outside of the validity interval and would have succeeded otherwise. 107 only had bad outputs, indicating that either some input they depended on was already spent, or it was in a chain transaction, thus didn't exist. And about 349 both had invalid inputs and were outside the validity intervals. More analysis on these transactions is needed. It's going to take some serious time to go through forensically. Granted, this doesn't include transactions that never made it to the network at all, such as faulty third-party infrastructure between the user and the Cardano network. It's not a problem because you don't have to spend money. All right, so this is one of the most important parts of his write-up, and I really admire that Pi did this because we need a common vocabulary to discuss these things. Classification and history. I'd like to share my personal taxonomy for classifying large-scale disruptions in blockchain, along with some historical outages on other popular blockchains that give rise to this taxonomy. I formed this mental model shortly after the last incident I reported on, and it's a shame I didn't write it down then. Well, you did now, and you're famous, and there are thousands of people watching right now live, Pi. Congratulations. It is an attempt to hold myself accountable to the facts and avoid confirmation bias about the chain I've chosen to build my career around. First, here is my personal definitions of the term, quote, soft fork and, quote, hard fork. If you ever want to know the difference, guys, between a soft fork and a hard fork, and it's not Viagra, it's right here. Let's talk about it. A soft fork is any difference in consensus where the set of accepted blocks by one chain is a superset of the accepted blocks on another chain. Okay, so you have two sets, and one's a superset of the other. So if you have a set 1, 2, 3, and you have a set 1, 2, 3, 4, the set 1, 2, 3, 4 is a superset of the other set, meaning it contains the other set and more. That's what superset means. In this case, usually Nakamoto consensus has a chance to recover because if the subset chain overtakes the superset nodes will automatically switch. So when they do, they'll go with the more restrictive, meaning that 1, 2, 3 will be included, but 4 will be popped off. Okay? Most often, people also attach a temporal direction to this. A soft fork is when the newer nodes accept a subset of the blocks of the older nodes, but I don't find it useful to restrict my definition in this way. And indeed, what we saw here is the older nodes being the more restrictive ones, but we still benefited from this property. Okay. Hard fork, then, is any difference in consensus where the set of accepted blocks between the two forks is incomparable. There are blocks that would never be accepted by one and not the other, and vice versa. This prevents the nodes from ever converging without manual intervention. This is what happens to Solana when it's had its historic forks. Things occurred, and it created situations where they could not come back together. They were broken apart, and they had to manually intervene and glue them together. In the case of a soft fork, this actually, technically speaking, if you think about orphan blocks, does occur with Bitcoin. So miner A wins a block, miner B has a block around the same time. You now have a race condition for the next block, and let's say miner B wins it. The block that A found is now orphaned, and it's gone. So one is a superset of the other. These categories are sorted for those I consider to the most serious to least, though the ordering at the end is far more arguable and negotiable. Okay, so you also have sovereignty violation. Any bug or exploit that leads to remote code execution, forged signatures, repossessed funds in the ledger or like, this is a violation of the core sovereignty and safety of the chain itself. Consequence, complete loss of trust, likely irrecoverable. No known examples on major L1s, but Bitcoin came close in 2018, was CEV 2018 17144, that would have allowed duplicate inputs, and in 2012 with the duplicate Coinbase bug, which had a theoretical signature forgery attack vector. A future quantum attack or on ECDSA would likely qualify and impact many chains. Basically, I can steal your money. I can just take your keys, steal your money, do all kinds of crazy shit. That's as bad as it gets. Your system dies. Pi didn't mention this, but actually the bug that was in Zcash many, many years ago would allow counterfeiting of tokens. You couldn't even discover it because of the way zero-knowledge systems work. So that was another example of a potential sovereignty violation bug, but it wasn't clear if anybody ever utilized it. Probably not. Ledger violation. Any bug that leads to a violation of the core ledger guarantees for any length of time that any human would reasonably conclude is a violation of the intent in chain. This was what I was talking about earlier in my video about the Constitution, about what the intent on chain is. Consequence, severe loss of trust, recoverable on the case-by-case basis, but it should involve extreme changes to engineering discipline to regain trust. Example, in August 2010, Bitcoin suffered, and I was around, I remember this, a value overflow bug. This created 184.4 billion Bitcoin. So when they say there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin, well, in August of 2010, actually there was at one point 184.4 billion Bitcoin. Did you guys know that? 9,000 times the intended 21 million supply cap. No reasonable person could argue this was in line with the spirit of the protocol. But I thought code is law. This required a soft fork where miners upgraded to a node version that rejected transactions with the overflow and recovered 19 hours after the faulty transaction. So it actually took longer for Bitcoin to recover than it did Cardano. We were 14, it was 19. The consequence of their issue was there was 184 billion Bitcoin in circulation that shouldn't have been. And that history was abandoned. It was thrown away. It was orphaned out. With old node version switching to longest chain as it overtook the faulty one. Consensus violation, hard fork, any bug that results in a central decision-making body mandating or effectively mandating through outsized leverage a violation of the chain consensus, usually via node version that forces a rollback to before some bad event or coordinated truncation of the chain. So in other words, you're editing the chain. Consequence, excusable, recoverable early in the blockchain's life cycle, less excusable as time progresses. The mother of all examples here is the Ethereum DAO hack. That was a smart contract exploit that resulted in a special ledger rule to force a hard fork to a different consensus. The Ethereum Foundation exchanges heavily influenced the miners to choose this fork. They strong-armed them, basically. They said, you'll get delisted and your token will go to zero. That's when I got involved in the whole Ethereum Classic Ethereum thing. But this is basically manually editing the chain because you didn't like the history. Large chain reorg soft fork. Any bug or network condition that results in an extended divergence of consensus on chain, but which ultimately heals itself organically or through social consensus and has no explicit lasting impact on the node implementation. Exposes certain application types such as bridges or exchanges to financial risk through replay attacks or for being on the wrong fork. For example, if you have a bonding scheme. Consequence, recoverable with heavy learnings from the incident if extremely rare. Polygon experienced several decently sized reorgs in 2023 and 2022. The incident described above also falls in this category. And there you go. It was a large chain reorg and soft fork. And then you have a smart contract exploit. A bug in a smart contract of a popular widespread protocol that results in a large monetary loss to users, mostly the fault of the smart contract author, but usually some blame lies with the language constructs that made the bug difficult to avoid. Recoverable for the layer 1 with concern depending on the bug. And there's millions of those. It's about $80 million a day. Full consensus halt. Any bug or network condition that results in extended complete halt of consensus. No nodes can make progress without manual human intervention. Recoverable with concern, unacceptable if repeatedly and regularly happens. Several examples from Solana, the Binance Smart Chain Bridge exploit, the Avalanche Gossip bug. Basically, it just stops, and you have to start it again. You got to go kick it and restart it. In some cases, you have to edit to restart. Okay, and that's just shitty. You lose liveness, and it doesn't come back on. no matter how much you blow the cartridge. Degradation of service. Any bug or network condition that results in a wide-scale degradation of quality of service for end users. Consequences recoverable. The Ethereum Shanghai DDoS attack, denial of service attack, Sunday swaps launch, January 23rd hiccup. All right. Classification of this incident. Given the above taxonomy, there was a large chain reorg and soft fork that self-repaired. It was serious, but not existential. There will be plenty of people who are eager to pounce on Cardano's misfortune, mainly because the community has a tendency to be a bit pretentious when it comes to our uptime. Fair enough. I won't try to waste my breath in futile narrative wars with them. The real primary concern outside of degradation of service for users was in systems that were unaware of the chain fork and opened themselves up to replay attacks across both chains. For example, suppose an exchange is on the wrong fork and allows users to deposit funds to the exchange, sell them for another token, and withdraw them to another chain. When the chain reorganizes, the user will have extracted value from the exchange. Analysis is still underway to determine if this happened, but given the rapid response from the exchanges and the small number of transactions on the pig chain and not the chicken chain, this currently seems unlikely to me. I think so too, but we'll know in a few weeks. What matters in the end is the following. Did the chain continue to make progress? Yes. Was service degraded? Yes. Were funds at risk? Potentially, for a subset of people. Did the Cardano network recover under essentially the worst case conditions? Yes. Would I have confidence to build my business on top of infrastructure that exhibited this level of robustness? Absolutely, yes. So let's talk about the good and the bad. So the good. Throughout this, Cardano's engineering excellence and decentralization shine. Many decisions that some thought were overly paranoid proved their worth, and I personally learned a number of things about how Cardano operates and inoculates itself against forks like this that impress me. Number one, I'm extremely glad that the node was implemented in a language that takes memory safety extremely seriously. The particular kind of bug related to serializing out of buffers with improper bound checking in any other language could have been very serious. It would have been very easy in languages like C and C++, for example, for such a bug to enable arbitrary code execution. From there, it's not hard to imagine someone extracting the private keys from many SPOs, getting complete control of the chain and any funds that happen to be accessible from those keys. So in other words, if we wrote it in C, we'd have been dead. Straight up dead. Chain would have broken. Haskell, we actually survived that. Rust would have survived it too. I'm extremely glad that IOG's emphasis on high assurance engineering was largely prevented much more serious bugs. The fact that one slipped through after 8 years doesn't nullify all the effort that went in to eliminate these kinds of bugs before they surface. Remember, no piece of software is perfect, and we only see the planes that survive. So 8 years, one major bug. Not bad. I'm extremely impressed with the reporting and monitoring infrastructure maintained by the founding entities, being able to track the independent forks, the versions that people were on, the rates at which blocks were being produced, writing tools on demand. This was where Amaru came in handy, and the Canary transaction infrastructure all gave critical and actionable insights throughout the fork that let us reach out to specific SPOs and shape our community strategy. I believe it can be better, but this is absolutely true. It was good. I'm extremely impressed with the elegance of Ouroboros. By the way, it was nice being with Agalos, because we designed Ouroboros together, and for us to sit there and watch this protocol that was on paper in 2016 that we talked about so much actually survive an attack that we imagined could occur. I always knew about the 2,160 rollback horizon, which equated to about 12 hours worth of blocks, but the uncommon wisdom had been wait 3 times as long, 36 hours for true finality. That always confused me until this event. In the case of a partition, the chain density on both forks goes down. That means that each chain will take longer to reach a depth of 2,160 blocks. This creates a natural self-regulation in times of stress, extending the length of rollback horizon in proportion to the severity of the fork. That's just mathematically elegant, isn't it? Time works differently, and time always works in your favor when a crisis occurs. I'm also impressed by the design of the networking stack for a number of reasons. One, the hot, warm, cold peer system led to most nodes quickly finding peers that agreed with them. As chain density on the pig fork dropped, they reverted to a safe node. In a safe node mode, nodes are more cautious about which nodes they trust, reverting to bootstrap peers, which are still Emergo IG and Cardano Foundation, and local trusted roots. By the way, Bitcoin has bootstrap nodes, bootstrap peers. You should take a look. They're hard-coded in. Each SBO is able to specify their bootstrap peers and local trusted roots, putting them in control of the trusted backbone of the network. Since these nodes were more likely to have been upgraded in this case, it would stop the spread of pig chain blocks, lowering chain density further, allowing the Cardano network to heal. Slow the pig chain down. The independence of many protocols meant that even throughout, transactions nearly always propagated widely to all peers. This meant that even while the fork was ongoing, most user transactions could be included in both forks, and service was largely uninterrupted. This does emphasize the importance that certain application-type programs defensively in response to the network partitions, chain forks, and lower density, and there will likely be discussions in the coming days as to how to expose these metrics and design patterns better to guard against double spend risk. I was impressed by the decentralization throughout our community, and not just as a buzzword. Our diversity of node versions was paradoxically both the source of the problem and helpful in the recovery. This problem wouldn't have occurred if all nodes were identical, but it's impractical to expect total conformity in a distributed system of this scale. So in the absence of that, the nodes still on the older desired version help to stop the spread of the pig chain and accelerate the recovery. In the future, diversity of implementations will have a similar effect. Higher risk that there's a difference of behavior, but lower risk that a bug in any one implementation could take out the whole network or chain. The communication infrastructure meant that thousands of SPOs were able to be notified throughout a variety of different channels: Discord, Slack, Telegram, email, Twitter. The war room was populated by members of many different organizations, including the founding entities Intersect, the technical thought leaders like Andrew Westberg. By the way, was a beast of a man. He was a hero there. He really did a lot of great work. And representatives from exchanges, dApps. No one entity made a unilateral decision about which fork to endorse, as many were involved in that discussion. There's a lot more to be impressed by, but these were the standouts for me. The bad. That being said, I promised I wouldn't shy away where Cardano fell short. Here are places where the incident highlighted areas where we can focus on. Number one, anecdotally, many users had more frustrating experiences than the Canary test would imply. I'd love to see the Cardano Foundation improve this and partner with ecosystem infrastructure like Blockfrost or in wallets to improve our tracking of the typical user experience at any given time. We actually need a Canary net, and we can work on that. It seems like most or all of our chain explorers depend on Cardano DB Sync, which can blind us when a bug impacts a single component. I'd love to see more diversity in architecture from these tools. And that's going to happen in 2026 when all the other nodes come. The fact that the bug appeared at all is a failure of our testing rigor. This is one area that historically Cardano has really shined, but I suspect, and I'm purely speculating here, that intense ramping up of pressure to deliver governance and other features over the last year and a half has pulled attention away from these efforts. Okay, well, that's fair to speculate, and there's some truth to that, but there's also some reality that there's a probability distribution that the longer you go on with software, the higher the probability there will be at least one bug within a given window of time. So one bug per 8 years is there, but there's a whole postmortem that has to be done, and we have to fix it, and new tools have to be brought in, new procedures and policies have to be brought in. But definitely pressure was one area. But remember, this bug came before the governance pressure. It came in 2022. Similar, I think, Sebastian with an E, that's Sebastian G from DC Spark, now the CTO of Midnight, has the right idea with regards to doing code gen and fuzzing from spec rather than generating a spec from the implementation. Yeah, you should never generate a spec from the implementation. You're going the wrong direction. And that's something that Project Blueprint is trying to solve. This is going to be extra pertinent to two different projects Sunday Labs is working on, Amaru and Acropolis. We now have direct evidence of the importance of the testing rigor, and will need to be on high alert for very subtle divergences between implementations. Such divergences, and this was one of the reasons why I was very, very bearish on prematurely creating alternative implementations. Such divergences have a high chance of being hard forks rather than soft forks. Once that happens, no bueno. Very hard to put the network back together because of the completely different stack of decisions. Here's Sebastian with an A, leads the Great Cardano Blueprint Initiative in an effort to document and specify what it means to be a Cardano node. So before you create alternative nodes, You create the formal specifications, the testing strategy, and a certification program, and your canary net to make sure you don't have hard forks with that. As mentioned above, I'd like to see a node to client mini protocols that allow dApps, wallets, and exchanges have better insight into the health of the chain network. They should have easy APIs and official design patterns around circuit breakers and finality windows to make their apps even more robust to such events. That'll come. While the social consensus for the which fork to choose was robust, I think it could have been better. I imagine that many SPOs upgraded blind, based on trusting the recommendations of the founding entities alone, and without a clear understanding of the implications. And some obscure hypothetical scenarios, one could imagine this being used to fork the chain maliciously. I think we'd only benefit from improved education about how Ouroboros works, what the implications are, and to ensure that as many SPOs as possible are able to make informed decisions on tight deadlines. Okay. This right here, I think one of the best things we can do and work on is to create an AI system that we give to every single stake pool operator that acts as an upgrade sentinel. And basically, if they get an upgrade request, the AI helps them reason about a series of questions and a series of tests that they should conduct before they blindly upgrade. This will compensate for the fact that not every SPO is Agalos Kiasis or Duncan Coots or Pi, and they don't have a detailed, intimate, core developer level understanding of how the protocol works. And I think we can build that rather quickly. And if anybody in the community wants to volunteer to do that, it would be a really fun experiment. I think it's worth treasury funding, and it can be done rather quickly and constantly upgraded, and we'll get rather superhuman. And this will add as an additional layer to quickly inoculate the system. To the above point, in a recent video update, Charles Hoskinson called for a built-in pub/sub architecture. For those unaware, this is an extra protocol built into the network that enables broadcasting messages for a variety of use cases, leveraging the incredibly connected global network of Cardano nodes. Such a network would have allowed Intersect and others to broadcast SPOs on an emergency channel, alerting them of the urgent need to upgrade. I also believe this would have been a good addition and would unlock a lot of opportunities for Cardano as well. In the end, I believe you should assume every chain is likely one bad transaction away from a similar disruption. It's 2 p.m. Do you know where your children are? Do you know who your children's friends are? One bad transaction. If you can, but find the right incantation. Ask yourself, not for the sake of some Twitter argument, but for truly your own peace of mind, how would your favorite chain have stood up to such a breakdown in consensus? Personally, I'm coming away both impressed by Cardano and with a personal to-do list of where I can put the hard work in to improve things even further. Well, first off, Pi, thank you so much for writing that up. You know, it's really a lot of work you put into it, and you know, you're a great guy, and you have a lot of cool things that you do for the network. It was a long day, and it's been a long week, and we're just pushing through. And you know, this is we only got to survive because we put in the homework early, and we put a lot of effort in. And I'm very proud of the fact that we survived. This could have killed other chains. So links there if you guys want to read it yourselves. But this was a live video. With my commentary, it went from a 26-minute read to a 48-minute read. But I hope this was beneficial for you guys and you learned a little bit about it. 99% of the Twitter sphere is underinformed, robotic, and their opinions, just frankly speaking, don't matter. What matters is, at the end of the day, November 24th, 2025, Cardano is one chain, it's running, and it's stronger today than when it was attacked. And we got a lot of post-mortem to do, and there's going to be a ton of rooms that nobody cares about where people are going to sit down and have deep technical conversations about how we get even stronger. So, net, what this incident meant is that Cardano is going to enter 2026 with a game plan to not only be a great chain, an exceptional chain, but the most reliable distributed system humanity has ever built. It'll take a little while to get there, and there's a lot of work to do, but the next time something like this comes down, and there will be a next time because bugs come up. They're inevitable. They will and can and always will happen. We'll be able to even crush it faster. Doesn't mean we're perfect. It doesn't mean that somehow, some way, everybody is just never going to make a mistake. We will make mistakes as an ecosystem. But it's about how do you fix them. And we can keep working for it. And we will continue having integrity as a whole. So, to all of those who helped get this done, you can see the decentralization. And if you actually give a fair chance to Cardano and you look at what happened, I think you'll leave thoroughly impressed by how we got to where we got to. If you're just a Twitter troll, why do you matter? Your opinion doesn't matter. It just doesn't. So, as Paul Harvey used to say, that is the rest of the story. Thank you all and have a good night.